Hello, everyone. Tonight we're going to imagine for a moment that warm, soft bed, the one you share, the one where dreams are woven and secrets are whispered. Now, picture a subtle chill seeping into that warmth, not from an open window, but from something far more insidious. A silent tension, a ledger meticulously kept in the quiet corners of the mind, balancing not just dollars and cents, but affection, effort, and perceived worth. She's been unemployed for 2 months, and you've been paying all the bills, every single one, the rent, the groceries, even her impulse buys. But then, when you gently declined to fund her desire for a new designer bag, a silence descended, a heavy, pregnant silence, and then the words, delivered with a sharpness that stung. "You're selfish." You remember that sting, don't you? The sudden twist in your gut, because deep down, you knew it wasn't just about the money. Not truly. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Tell me, where are you tuning in from tonight? What time is it for you right now? Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. You remember the early days, don't you? The effortless merging of lives, the blissful ignorance of financial realities. It felt so natural. You were swept up in the current of new love, a powerful tide that seemed to smooth over any potential ripples. Living together felt like the logical, inevitable next step, a declaration of commitment sealed with shared keys and a hastily arranged move-in date. The apartment, with its sun-drenched windows and cozy corners, became your sanctuary, your shared haven. At first, the bills were an afterthought, a minor inconvenience to be dealt with, always assumed to be a joint effort, an unspoken understanding of partnership. But then, almost imperceptibly, a shift began. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic declaration, more like a slow, creeping fog rolling in, obscuring the clear lines of what was fair, what was balanced. You started noticing the little things. You were always the one reaching for your wallet at the grocery store. The dinner dates, once a spontaneous back and forth, began to lean heavily on your card. The rent, a formidable sum each month, became your silent burden. You'd transfer the money, click confirm, and a small, almost imperceptible tremor of unease would ripple through you. It was a subtle weight, not yet crushing, but certainly present. You told yourself it was temporary, a fleeting phase. She was looking for work, diligently sending out resumes, you reasoned. This was just a brief period of adjustment, a testament to your unwavering support, your deep love. You were a team, after all, and teams pulled together. You recalled the stories of old, how property and wealth were intrinsically tied to power and lineage, often dictated by birthright rather than individual contribution. In ancient Rome, for instance, a woman's dowry often solidified alliances and secured her position within her husband's household, a financial transaction woven into the very fabric of marriage. Your situation, of course, was far removed from such rigid structures, yet the echo of financial dependence, even if temporary, felt subtly familiar, like a whisper from a distant past. You sometimes wondered if your roles were reversed. Would the ease of her acceptance of your unequal earnings be quite so natural? There was a quirky detail, a habit she had developed that always seemed to highlight this growing disparity. Every time you'd pay for something, a coffee, a quick lunch, she'd make a show of reaching for her purse. A quick, almost theatrical gesture, her hand hovering over the zipper. But then she'd sigh, a delicate, almost imperceptible sound, and let her hand fall away. A silent concession. It was a ritual that spoke volumes without a single word being exchanged. You found yourself anticipating it, almost bracing for it, and each time, a tiny crack would form in the pristine image of your effortless partnership. It was a small thing, this ritual, but it began to gnaw at you, a persistent, almost subliminal reminder of the uneven scales. Academically, you understood the psychology behind it. Dr. Sarah B. Roberts, a renowned researcher in financial psychology, often posited that in relationships, financial contributions are not merely about economic exchange, but deeply intertwined with perceptions of power, love, and commitment. When one partner consistently contributes more, it can, over time, subtly shift the dynamic, creating an unconscious sense of obligation or even resentment in the higher earner, and a potential erosion of agency or guilt in the lower earner. It wasn't about the money itself, not truly. It was about what the money represented, the unspoken contracts being drawn, the unspoken expectations being set. You felt this truth resonate deep within you, a quiet hum beneath the surface of your everyday interactions. The silence around the money became a palpable presence in the room, a third entity sitting between you, casting a long, quiet shadow. You wanted to address it, to simply lay it all out, but the words seemed to catch in your throat, held captive by a fear of disrupting the fragile peace you both seemed to inhabit. You thought about the 13 times you'd almost brought it up, the words forming on your tongue, the breath held, the moment passing, the 13 moments of hesitation, each one cementing the silence a little more, making the eventual conversation seem even more daunting. And with each passing week, each unpaid bill that landed solely on your shoulders, that tremor of unease grew, evolving from a subtle ripple into a slow, persistent current, pulling you further and further into uncharted waters. The silence around the money became a living thing, expanding, filling the space between you like an unspoken agreement. You found yourself calculating not just the financial contributions, but the emotional ones too. Each time you picked up the tab, a small, invisible tally mark appeared in your mind. It wasn't conscious at first, more like a subconscious hum, a low-frequency vibration of unfairness. You started to notice how easily she accepted your offerings, how a thank you often felt more like an acknowledgement of a due rather than an expression of gratitude. The thought, should I pay half the bills even though I earn way less than my boyfriend, reversed in your mind, became, should I pay all the bills even though I earn way more than my girlfriend, and the absurdity of it gnawed at you. You remembered stories of the Great Depressions, of families forced to pool every last penny, not out of choice, but out of stark necessity. In those times, financial transparency was not a luxury, but a survival mechanism, a shared burden that either forged unbreakable bonds or shattered them irrevocably. Your situation, of course, was one of relative comfort, yet the echo of historical hardship, of financial strain, putting pressure on the most intimate relationships, resonated within you. It was a subtle, unsettling reminder that even in prosperity, money could become a wedge. She had another quirky habit, one that always seemed to coincide with your financial contributions. After you'd paid a significant bill or bought groceries for the week, she'd suggest a cozy night in. Dim lights, a carefully selected movie, her favorite tea. It was a lovely gesture, a comforting ritual, and you cherished those quiet evenings. But a small, cynical part of you, a part you tried desperately to silence, wondered if these moments of intimacy were, in some unconscious way, a form of repayment, a soft, emotional currency exchanged for your hard-earned dollars. You dismissed the thought immediately, scolding yourself for such cynical interpretations. But the seed had been planted, and it continued to sprout in the quiet corners of your mind. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a prominent figure in relational economics, often argued that financial transparency and open communication are not merely good practices, but essential pillars for long-term relational health. She posited that when financial disparities are left unaddressed, they can lead to what she termed covert contracts, unspoken agreements and expectations that, when unmet, breed resentment and distrust. You felt the truth of this theory in your bones. The covert contract here was simple. You would provide, and she would simply exist within that provision. It wasn't malicious, you knew that. But it was there, a silent weight settling between you. You tried to push it down, to rationalize it away. Love meant sacrifice, didn't it? Love meant supporting each other through thick and thin. But the thick seemed to be getting thicker, and the thin was becoming increasingly elusive. You found yourself fantasizing about casual conversations, about just saying it. Hey, about the bills. But the words always got stuck. You imagined her reaction, the wounded look, the quiet hurt, the accusations of you being unromantic, of reducing your love to mere transactions. And so, the silence continued, a heavy blanket draped over the most sensitive part of your shared life. There were 13 instances you remembered, clear as day, where you had opened your mouth to speak, the words hovering on your lips, only to swallow them back down. 13 times you'd almost said, "I'm feeling the strain," or "Could we talk about how we're splitting things?" Each missed opportunity for genuine conversation added another layer to the unspoken tension, making the eventual confrontation feel even more impossible, like trying to dismantle a towering Jenga block, knowing one wrong move could bring the whole structure crashing down. The air between you, once so light and carefree, now felt thick with unspoken numbers, with the weight of unshared burdens. The unspoken agreement, the silent ledger, began to cast long shadows over every corner of your shared life. It wasn't just about the bills anymore. It was about a subtle shift in the balance of power, a quiet resentment festering beneath the surface of your affection. You found yourself scrutinizing her choices, her seemingly casual purchases, with a new, unwelcome, critical eye. A simple takeout order, once a shared pleasure, now felt like another line item added to your mental tally. The ease and spontaneity that once defined your relationship slowly began to erode, replaced by a growing awareness of financial implications in nearly every interaction. You recalled the historical concept of primogeniture, where the eldest son inherited the entirety of the family's wealth and property, leaving younger siblings often dependent or forced to forge their own paths. While drastically different from your modern relationship, the echo of unequal inheritances, of one party carrying a disproportionate burden or receiving an unearned advantage, resonated in the quiet moments. It highlighted how deeply ingrained the concept of inherited wealth and power dynamics has been throughout history, shaping relationships in ways both grand and subtle. Your personal situation, though on a much smaller scale, felt like a modern, micro version of this ancient imbalance. She had a peculiar way of expressing gratitude, or perhaps of acknowledging your financial contributions, that always left you feeling off-kilter. Whenever you'd paid for something significant, like a month's rent or a large grocery haul, she'd often initiate physical intimacy. A gentle touch, a lingering kiss, a closeness that, while desired, began to feel tinged with an uncomfortable undercurrent. It was as if her body was offering a form of silent recompense, a physical expression of gratitude for a financial burden lifted. You heard a zipper, then everything went silent, except for the sound of a heart screaming. The intimacy, once a pure expression of connection, now felt subtly entangled with the financial disparity, creating a strange and unsettling emotional complexity you struggled to articulate even to yourself. Dr. Jonathan Haidt, a moral psychologist, often speaks of moral foundations theory, suggesting that human morality is built upon a set of innate intuitions. In this context, the feeling of fairness or equity is a powerful moral foundation. When financial contributions are uneven, it can trigger a deep-seated sense of unfairness, leading to moral injury within the relationship. You felt this acutely. It wasn't just about the money. It was about a violation of an implicit moral contract, a perceived imbalance in the scales of give and take. The love was still there, a strong, undeniable force, but it was now laced with a bitter tang of inequity, a persistent, low-level hum of injustice that you couldn't quite silence. The thought of breaking up, once an unthinkable concept, began to surface more frequently, like an unwelcome guest, not because you didn't love her, but because the weight of the unspoken was becoming suffocating. You imagined the conversation, the accusations, the hurt. You pictured her crying, your own heart aching in response. And so, you pulled back, just a little. Your touches became less spontaneous, your laughter a shade less genuine. The 13 times you'd thought about ending it flashed through your mind, each thought a splinter in the foundation of your shared life. Each time, you pushed it away, clinging to the hope that things would somehow, magically, balance themselves out. But hope was beginning to feel like a flimsy shield against a growing storm. The once effortless flow of your days together now felt strained, like trying to navigate a river choked with unseen debris. The quiet moments, once filled with comforting presence, now felt heavy with the weight of unsaid things, of numbers quietly accumulating, of a future that seemed increasingly uncertain and, dare you admit it, a little unfair. The quiet hum of imbalance began to crescendo, no longer a faint background noise, but a persistent, undeniable presence. You found yourself retreating inwards, a subtle emotional withdrawal that mirrored the financial one. The once bright open spaces of your relationship started to feel smaller, more constricted. You began to question not just her financial habits, but her understanding of partnership, her perception of your shared future. Was this what she truly expected? A life where your income subsidized hers indefinitely? The thought was a bitter pill, difficult to swallow. You reflected on the historical evolution of women's rights to property and financial independence. For centuries, women were often considered legal extensions of their fathers or husbands, unable to own land, enter into contracts, or manage their own finances. It was only through painstaking legal battles and societal shifts that women gained the autonomy they now possess. This historical context served as a poignant reminder of the hard-won freedom to manage one's own destiny, a freedom you now, ironically, felt quietly curtailed by the unspoken financial arrangements in your own relationship. It highlighted how even in modern times, financial dynamics could subtly reintroduce forms of dependence. She had a particularly endearing, yet equally frustrating quirky habit: her boundless optimism. Even when bills piled up, or when the cost of a spontaneous weekend trip seemed daunting, she'd simply smile, a hopeful, almost childlike belief that it would all work out. While admirable in other contexts, this unwavering optimism, coupled with a lack of concrete financial contribution, began to feel less like a charming trait and more like a willful disregard for reality. It was as if her sunny disposition shielded her from the practical implications of your unequal earnings, leaving you to shoulder the weight of both the finances and the unspoken anxieties. Dr. Brené Brown, a leading researcher on vulnerability and shame, speaks extensively about the importance of courageous conversations in relationships. She argues that avoiding difficult discussions, particularly around sensitive topics like money, often stems from a fear of vulnerability or a desire to maintain a perceived harmony. However, this avoidance ultimately leads to resentment, disconnection, and a weakening of trust. You felt this acutely. The silence, once a shield, was now a barrier. It was a wall you had both, in different ways, helped to construct, and now you stood on opposite sides, feeling increasingly isolated. The truth of this resonated with a profound ache in your chest. You began to notice her subtle expressions, a momentary flicker in her eyes, a slight stiffening of her posture when the topic of money, however obliquely, arose in conversation. It was as if she too was aware of the elephant in the room, but was equally unwilling or unable to acknowledge its presence. You imagined a faint, invisible cord stretching between your wallets, a taut line of obligation that grew tighter with every passing day. The 13 times you'd imagined saying, "I'm not comfortable with this," replayed in your mind, each hypothetical utterance met with the same imagined, pained silence from her. The weight of this unspoken truth became a constant companion, sitting beside you at dinner, lying between you in bed. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but a deep, quiet pressure, a persistent reminder that something essential was out of alignment. You yearned for a release, for the courage to speak, to dismantle the barrier, even if it meant a temporary shattering of the fragile peace. The quiet ache of your own self-reflection grew, fueled by the stark reality that continuing this way was not sustainable, not for you, and ultimately not for the integrity of your connection. The introspection, once a quiet whisper, grew into a resonant echo within you, reflecting the deepening chasm between your financial realities and your shared ideal. You began to see how deeply ingrained financial beliefs were, not just in her, but in yourself. You realized that your own discomfort in addressing the issue stemmed from a societal conditioning that often equates money with love, generosity with self-sacrifice. It was a tangled web of emotions and expectations woven into the very fabric of your upbringing. You remembered the historical concept of coverture in English common law, where upon marriage, a woman's legal identity was absorbed by her husband's. She couldn't own property, make contracts, or control her own wages independently. While this archaic legal framework is long gone, the lingering psychological shadows of such historical dependence can still subtly influence modern perceptions of roles and responsibilities within a partnership. You wondered if, on some unconscious level, a similar dynamic was at play, not legally enforced, but subtly enacted through an unspoken understanding of your differing incomes. There was a peculiar habit she had, almost endearing in its innocence, yet frustrating in its implications. When you would mention a future goal, a vacation, a home improvement, even a new appliance, her eyes would light up with genuine excitement. She'd immediately begin planning, envisioning the perfect details, completely bypassing the financial realities. It was as if her mind, unburdened by the practicalities of earning, soared freely into the realm of desire. This effortless dreaming, while charming, often felt like a stark contrast to your own meticulous budgeting and careful calculations, a subtle reminder of the unequal load you carried. Dr. Sonia Lyubomirsky, a leading researcher in positive psychology, often highlights the concept of hedonic adaptation, where individuals quickly return to a baseline level of happiness after positive or negative events. In financial terms, this can mean that a partner who consistently receives financial support might adapt to this comfort, taking it for granted over time, while the giving partner might experience declining satisfaction due to the perceived imbalance. You could feel this adaptation in your own heart. The initial joy of providing, of being the supportive partner, had gradually morphed into a quiet resentment, a slow erosion of your own sense of generosity. It was a sobering realization, highlighting the insidious nature of unaddressed disparities. The 13 times you'd almost voiced your frustration, the words caught in your throat, felt like a recurring dream. Each time, you imagined the potential fallout, the tears, the arguments, the fundamental shift in the dynamic you both inhabited. And so, you kept silent, caught in a self-perpetuating cycle of avoidance and quiet suffering. The silence felt heavy, like a cloak woven from unspoken expectations and unfulfilled desires, muffling the genuine connection that once thrived between you. You started to see patterns in her behavior, not just around money, but in her general approach to responsibility, a tendency to defer decisions, to wait for you to take the lead. It wasn't overt, not a demand, but a subtle leaning, a comfortable reliance that, in other contexts, might have felt like trust. But now, filtered through the lens of financial inequality, it began to feel like a burden. The apartment, once a shared sanctuary, now felt like a space where you were the primary caretaker, not just of its physical upkeep, but of its financial foundation. The realization was a quiet, almost painful click into place, a piece of the puzzle finally settling. The slow, internal shift had reached a critical mass. The weight of the unspoken was no longer bearable. You knew, with a quiet certainty, that this silent imbalance could not continue. The path forward, while daunting, felt clearer than the stagnant waters you had been navigating. It was time for a courageous conversation, a difficult unveiling of the truths that had festered in the quiet corners of your hearts. You thought of the historical accounts of women in Japan during the Edo period, often managing the household finances with meticulous care, despite not having formal employment outside the home. Their economic contributions were vital, though often unseen and unacknowledged in the broader societal structure. This contrast highlighted the subtle ways in which financial contributions, both direct and indirect, could be valued or devalued within a relationship, irrespective of historical context. Your situation felt like a modern echo of this underlying tension, where one partner's efforts were less visible, yet deeply impactful. She had a final, peculiar habit that, in this new light of self-reflection, began to feel less like a quirk and more like a manifestation of her discomfort. Whenever the topic of finances would accidentally surface, a news report about inflation, a comment about rising utility costs, she would immediately change the subject, often with a rapid-fire succession of unrelated questions, or by drawing your attention to something trivial. It was a verbal dance, a swift deflection designed to avoid confronting the very thing that hummed beneath your shared surface. This pattern of evasion solidified your resolve. The truth, however uncomfortable, needed to be spoken. Dr. John Gottman, a leading researcher in marital stability and divorce prediction, emphasizes the critical role of managing conflict in healthy relationships. He posits that couples who avoid conflict or sweep difficult issues under the rug are far more likely to experience relational decay. Instead, he advocates for gentle initiation of difficult conversations, active listening, and a willingness to compromise. You felt the profound truth of this. The fear of conflict had kept you silent, but the cost of that silence was becoming too high. It was a slow, agonizing process of erosion, not a sudden collapse, but a gradual wearing away of the intimacy and trust that once defined your bond. The 13 times you had thought about breaking up, each moment of quiet despair now served as a stark reminder of the depth of the issue. You realized that these thoughts weren't born of a lack of love, but of a profound exhaustion from carrying an unequal load, from living in a world of unspoken agreements. This wasn't about selfishness. It was about self-preservation, about seeking a partnership that was truly equitable, truly a shared journey. You imagined the conversation, not as an accusation, but as an invitation. An invitation to build something stronger, something more honest. You would start gently, perhaps by sharing your own feelings, your own anxieties, rather than laying blame. "I've been feeling a little overwhelmed lately," you might begin, your voice soft, almost a whisper. "And I wanted to talk about how we manage our shared expenses." It wouldn't be easy. There would likely be tears, perhaps defensiveness, possibly even anger. But the thought of enduring another week, another month, another year of the silent ledger, of the unspoken burden, felt far more terrifying than the prospect of a difficult conversation. You allowed yourself to envision a different future, one where you both contributed openly and honestly, not just financially, but emotionally. A future where the apartment truly felt like a shared home, built on a foundation of mutual respect and clear understanding. The path was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, you felt a flicker of hope, a fragile but persistent belief that the silence could be broken and a new, more balanced chapter could begin. The quiet hum of the fan, the gentle rhythm of your own breathing in the soft darkness. Remember that initial image, the subtle chill seeping into the warmth of your shared bed? It was never about the numbers themselves, was it? Not truly. It was about the unspoken stories the numbers told, the silent agreements they forged, the subtle shifts in the landscape of your hearts. Like a river, constantly flowing, constantly shaping the land, money in a relationship quietly, relentlessly, sculpts the terrain of your intimacy. The journey to understanding, to finding balance, is never linear, never perfectly smooth. It is a path woven with vulnerability, with the courage to speak truths that have been held captive in the quietest corners of your being. May you find the courage in your own unique spaces to whisper those truths, to invite dialogue, and to mend what might have been silently frayed. May the quietness of your night be filled not with tension, but with the gentle promise of a new dawn, a renewed understanding, a softly murmured hope for shared burdens and shared joys. End of script. Leave a comment to let me know what you think.